tailored just for you. So please welcome Hannah Braye. Hannah is a registered nutritionist with an MSc in Personalised Nutrition from Middlesex University and a clinical practice diploma in Naturopathic Nutrition. She's the clinical director at Invivo Healthcare, a B Corp specialising in advanced microbiome testing and evidence-based microbiome-targeted supplements. Formerly a dispute resolution lawyer, Hannah follows her passion for food, health and personalised wellness into nutrition, bringing a wealth of clinical and industry experience. She's worked with probiotic specialists, run her own gut-focused nutrition practice, and has also worked and contributed to the Soil Association's Food for Life campaign. Hannah's talk is titled Transform Your Gut Health with Personalised Prebiotics, and she'll show us how targeted prebiotics from food or supplements can nourish your microbiome, help rebalance your gut and support your overall health. So let's, please do join me in giving a warm welcome to Hannah.
So, I'm going to be talking today about personalised prebiotics. So, just taking a little poll in the room, do any of you currently support your gut through prebiotic interventions that you're aware of today?
Does kefir count?
Kefir is more a probiotic kind of food because it's got those live microbes in. So, prebiotics, we'll talk about exactly what they are.
Asking, are we using any supplements or are we using prebiotics in diet?
In diet, either or.
Diet, yes. Supplements, no.
Okay, great. What we do tend to find is that people are maybe a little bit more aware of probiotics than they are prebiotics. But really, for me, prebiotics are the star of the biotics. I think they can have such a huge impact on our health. So what I'm going to be covering today is hopefully answering some questions for you in terms of what prebiotics are, how they work, what effects they have on digestive symptoms, and then answering the question, how should we be getting our prebiotics? So should we be getting them through food or supplements? And then I'm going to have a key focus on how you can really tailor your prebiotic intake to your own individual needs. And then I'll also do some quick practical tips on things you can start doing tomorrow to help increase your prebiotic intake. And if anyone's got any questions, do feel free just to stick your hand up and ask. All questions welcome. So I won't go through this again because Catherine gave me a lovely introduction. So just to give a little bit more information about Invivo, which is the company I currently work for, we're based in Stroud near Gloucestershire, and we're known as the Human Microbiome Company, and our mission is to support human health and ecology. And we're a B Corp certification, and as Catherine mentioned, we do both gut microbiome testing and gut microbiome supplements. So I'll start at the beginning with what prebiotics are. So this is the current scientific definition of a prebiotic. So a substrate that is selectively utilised by host microorganisms conferring a health benefit. Now that's a little bit dry and technical sounding, so I thought I'd break it down a little bit. So basically, a prebiotic is a substance, it can be any kind of substance, that predominantly feeds the beneficial microbes, either in your gut or elsewhere on the body. And that has to result in a proven health benefit. So ideally a proven health benefit in human clinical trials. So essentially, on a very basic level, prebiotics are food for your beneficial gut microbes. And one question that we do sometimes get asked about prebiotics is, well, aren't they just fibre? Doesn't fibre do it all? Do I need to worry about prebiotics if I've got fibre in my diet? So it's quite useful to answer that question thinking about that definition. So on this diagram you can see a continuum from one end of the spectrum to the other. So we've got insoluble fibres such as cellulose, which they're in every kind of plant. So they are a really important fibre source. They bulk the stool, but they're not prebiotic because they don't actually feed our gut microbes. We've then got soluble fibres, so an example of that would be psyllium husk, you may have heard of. So soluble fibres do feed the microbiome, but they're quite broad in what they feed. They don't selectively feed the beneficial species, so again, we don't classify them as prebiotics. And then we've got the fermentable fibres in the centre there. So many of these are prebiotics, they're the most well known. They fit the definition because they selectively feed beneficial species, and they also have some good clinical research behind them as well, showing health benefits in humans. Sorry, it's not the clearest.
I've got rubbish eyes.
And then on the right hand side, we've even got non-fibre based prebiotics. So these are more kind of recent and promising candidates as prebiotics. So things like polyphenols and polyunsaturated fatty acids as well. So you can see prebiotics are more than just fibre essentially. So Today I'm going to be mainly focusing on the fibre-based prebiotics though, because they are the ones that have the most research behind them currently. So in terms of how prebiotics work, so we spend a lot of time talking about what microbes we have in our gut. There's a lot of focus on whether we have good ones or bad ones, but it's also just, if not more important, to actually be thinking about how our microbiome is functioning. So it's not about who's in there, it's about how they're all collectively working together. And by functioning, I mean what metabolites or compounds they're creating. Because it's these compounds that they create that can interact with cells all over our body, and it's that which gives the health benefits, and those health benefits can either be positive or negative. So what we see with prebiotics is that they can modulate the gut microbiome, so they can help increase those beneficial species in the gut, and that has an effect that it decreases the unbeneficial species. They basically get crowded out, those less beneficial species. But the health benefits we see from prebiotics actually come from how they change the microbiome's function. So what we see is that many prebiotics can help the production of beneficial compounds such as short-chain fatty acids, which you might have heard about, especially if you've been to some of the other talks this week. I'm sure people will have been talking about them. The most well-known short-chain fatty acid is butyrate, which has really powerful anti-inflammatory effects both in the gut and systemically. And then prebiotics also decrease those potentially harmful compounds that the microbiome might be producing as well. And when we combine those two mechanisms of action, what we see are various health effects. So health effects both for the gastrointestinal tract, but also the immune system, inflammation, detoxification. There's some research on kind of gut-brain interactions and also cardiometabolic health as well. And there are various different types of prebiotic fibres, and they all have slightly different structures. And because of that, they have varying effects on the gut microbiome and gut health. So I've put the main types of prebiotic fibres on the slide here. So you may have heard of some of these. Inulin is quite a popular one. You might have seen it on food labels sometimes. You may have also heard of beta-glucans. They're the compounds that are in oats and porridge that give them their heart protective effects. And you might have probably heard of pectin as well, which is in fruits. Often, just when people are making jam, we talk about pectin. And there's some that you may not have heard of. So there's the oligosaccharides, such as fructooligosaccharides and galactooligosaccharides, or GOS. So FOS and GOS is what we call them as shorthand. We've also got things such as resistant starch, and then also PHGG, which stands for partially hydrolyzed guar gum, which is derived from the guar gum plant that goes through a bit of an enzymatic breakdown. So lots of different varieties of prebiotics that you can think about incorporating either through diets or supplements. And there's some overlap in how they work. So nearly all prebiotics will actually help to increase bifidobacteria in the gut. Bifidobacteria being some of those beneficial species you might have heard of. But not all of them will do. So resistant starch actually is the only one actually that doesn't produce bifidobacterium. But then some, but not all, will increase things like butyrate, that anti-inflammatory short-chain fatty acid. So if you're looking to increase butyrate, you need to be eating specific types of prebiotics. So looking specifically at the prebiotic effects on digestive symptoms, there is wider research for prebiotics, but for the sake of this talk, just to keep it to time, I decided to focus on digestive symptoms in particular. So I'm sorry if this table is a little bit small to see, but basically what this table does is it summarises the evidence that there is for the use of prebiotics for digestive symptoms currently. And it was all this evidence is all based on systematic reviews. So a systematic review is where you take the results of all the different clinical trials that have been done using something, and you look at the findings in total. So you pool the effects and you see whether there is good evidence across the studies to be recommending something. And what the research basically shows is that prebiotics have an interesting effect on gut symptoms. So if it's got a green arrow, that means there's been a positive effect. If there's a red arrow, it means there's been a potential negative effect. And if there's an equal sign, it means there's not been an effect either way. And so what we can see, for example, if we look at inulin on the left-hand side, we can see inulin has some nice evidence that it can improve stool form. So it can have some benefits, but you can see that inulin is quite well known for also having some side effects such as increasing flatulence and bloating and abdominal pain. And I'm going to talk a little bit later on about how you can reduce the risks of those side effects with prebiotics. And then if we look at GOS in the centre there, so galactooligosaccharides, you can see lots of lovely green arrows. So GOS has some really nice research for reducing straining, flatulence, bloating, abdominal pain, and IBS in general. But the thing with GOS is we still need to be thinking about whether it's suitable for us. It's derived from dairy, so it might not be suitable for vegans. It's also a FODMAP, so if you're following a low FODMAP diet, it's possibly not the prebiotic for you. And then you can see PHGG next to it, so that partially hydrolyzed guar gum. Also got lots of lovely green arrows as well, along with a few kind of results.
Sorry, could you just remind me what the FODMAP is? I have heard of it.
Yeah, so FODMAPs are types of very highly fermentable fibres or substances. So your gut microbiome will ferment them quite quickly, and that produces a lot of gas. So sometimes when someone is suffering with digestive conditions like IBS, they'll be told to go on a low FODMAP diet for a period of time. And the point of that is to try and reduce the fermentation in your gut, so to reduce those symptoms of bloating, essentially. If you're put on a low FODMAP diet, you'll be given a long list of foods that you should try and avoid, essentially. It's not a long-term diet, I should say. It shouldn't really ever be followed more than about 8 weeks. PHGG has lots of green arrows as well. You can see it's been shown to help reduce transit time, so it basically speeds up your transit time, so it can be quite useful in constipation. You can see at the bottom as well, it's also got some nice research on diarrhea. So PHGG has this lovely normalising effect on the stool. It can be really helpful for people who tend to swing between diarrhea and constipation, or if you suffer with one or the other. And then you can see resistant starch type 2 in the column next door. So that actually has been shown to increase transit time. So it makes your transit time slower. So again, resistant starch wouldn't be the one to go for if you have constipation, but it does have some nice research if you're suffering with diarrhea. So you can start to see how we can maybe start to think about our symptoms and start to tailor our prebiotic intake. So this is a really valid question. Should we be getting our prebiotics through food or supplements? So I'll start by looking at some dietary sources. So diet is a great way to consume more prebiotics. And I've put together this table which basically has the different types of prebiotics here, and then some key food sources as well. So there's a few things that you can take away from this. So have a look at fructooligosaccharides. So broccoli stalks are actually a good source of fructooligosaccharides. And I think we waste so much of our vegetable, we throw a lot of it away. But sometimes there's actually more fibrous, tougher parts of the vegetable. They're worth eating anyway.
You can put them in a smoothie.
Exactly, yeah, smoothie. You can also see for galacto-oligosaccharides, then beans and chickpeas and lentils are really good sources. And I think sometimes, especially in a more Western style diet, we tend to overlook these foods a little bit. Blackberries and avocado are great for pectin. If you're going to be eating bread, then pumpernickel bread or whole grain rye bread would help to increase your prebiotic intake as well. And then sometimes how ripe a food is or how it's cooked can increase its prebiotic content. So if we look at resistant starch, slightly green bananas or green banana flour can actually give you more resistant starch. And also if you cook and then cool your potatoes or other starch-based foods, that increases the resistant starch content as well. And then as I mentioned, oats are a really great source of those beta-glucans. So if your aim is to generally support your microbiome and encourage diversity in the gut, then what you want to be doing is eating as many of these different types of prebiotic foods as you can. And we know that dietary diversity is key to a healthy gut microbiome. And that might be beneficial, for example, if you've had to take antibiotics. We know antibiotics can have that broad spectrum effect on the gut, so if you're wanting to encourage diversity, getting as many different types of prebiotic foods would be great. If you do have a more individualised understanding of your microbiome, say you've done some microbiome testing, you could obviously go in with more specific food types. But is diet always enough, or is there ever a need to supplement? And to answer that question, we need to refer back to the research and see what's been shown. So here you can see some effects on the gut microbiome, beneficial effects on the gut microbiome that we might want to induce. On the next column you can see what evidence there is for dietary interventions, and then on the right the evidence for more supplemental prebiotic interventions. So you can see for some of the effects on the microbiome there is only food-based interventions that have research behind them. So branched-chain amino acids and TMAO, these are more unbeneficial compounds that have a more pro-inflammatory effect in the body, and actually the best research for them is dietary interventions. And then also IPA, which is an anti-inflammatory compound our gut microbes produce. Again, dietary interventions have the most research. But then there's also research where you have a choice. So for butyrate, for example, that short chain fatty acid, you could either be eating rye bread or rye bran enriched bread, or you could be taking a supplement such as PHGG, for example. And the same with beta-glucuronidase. But what I would point out in the research is that sometimes, especially with dietary interventions, they use really, really high doses. So 6 to 10 pieces of rye bran enriched bread a day. I think we can probably say that no one really needs to be eating 10 pieces of toast a day unless you're a professional athlete. And again, if you look here for IPA, they increased fibre to 58 grams a day. And when we think the average person in the UK is eating about 18 grams a day, we're supposed to be eating about 30 grams a day. To try and get to 58 is pretty crazy. So my advice always to clients is, be practical. Think about it. It may be that actually taking a teaspoon of PHGG might be easier for you in some situations. But even if you are going for dietary interventions, some is better than nothing. So even if you can't meet the really high doses met in the research, it's still worth adding these in where you can. And then for other markers in the gut, you can see that supplemental interventions are actually the ones that we probably need to be going for. So hydrogen sulfide is that kind of, it's a gas our microbes produce, can be often responsible for those eggy smelling farts. So if that sounds familiar, then FOS, fructooligosaccharides, would be prebiotic for you. And these are markers that are involved in gut barrier integrity. So you may have heard of the gut barrier, really important to keep it nice and strong. Leaky gut, essentially we're looking to reduce. So if that's your goal, then galacto-oligosaccharides have the research for them in supplemental form. What I would say is it's not really a question of either or though. It's perfectly fine to be getting your prebiotics from both food and supplemental sources. So next I'm going to just talk through a few key considerations when it comes to how you can personalise your prebiotic intake to your own individual needs. So there's 5 considerations that I think it's worth taking in mind. Some of these will be more relevant if you have done some gut microbiome testing and you do have an understanding of your baseline microbiome, and others are much more widely applicable as well. So I'll talk through each of them in turn. So what the research shows is that different people have different responses to prebiotics. We do see, trends in effects, but you'll always have some people who they don't react the way you expect them to, or the effects aren't what you expect. And what the research suggests is actually that baseline microbiome composition might play quite a significant role in that. So the research is still developing in this area, and if you work with a nutrition practitioner and you do some microbiome testing, they can give you more tailored interventions based on your microbiome. But just one example of this I wanted to point out is that in cases where you have an overgrowth of methane-producing bacteria in your gut, methane is one of those gases, you've probably heard cows produce it. So methane can be the source of various gut symptoms such as bloating, but also constipation. It really slows down our transit time. So if you have an overgrowth of methane-producing bacteria in your gut, you wouldn't want to be supplementing with inulin or resistant starch because they've both been shown to increase methane. So again, this shows you how you can go with more tailored recommendations if you have an understanding of your baseline microbiome. And then you might also want to be thinking about what mechanism of action are you wanting the prebiotics to have in your gut. So this diagram, in the centre here, you can see lots of those compounds that our gut microbiome produce for us. Some of them are beneficial, have good health associations, some of them poor health associations. And this diagram was put together after a really in-depth assessment of all the research, showing which prebiotics might be most beneficial in different circumstances. And so again, if you've done some gut testing, you can go in with very targeted interventions, but even if you haven't done any gut testing, we can put our own little detective hat on and we can decide, we can go for some clues to see which of these might be most beneficial for us. So if your goal is to have an anti-inflammatory effect, we want to be increasing those prebiotics that have been shown to increase these anti-inflammatory compounds. So for example, to increase this compound called IPA, which has anti-inflammatory effects, we might want to be increasing our foods that contain ellagic acid. And those are things like berries, walnuts, and pomegranate. And then if we're wanting to increase butyrate and the other short-chain fatty acids, you can see actually you've got a variety of different prebiotics you could think about adding in or supplementing. Then if you're looking to support the gut barrier, as I mentioned earlier, then I'd say GOS is the one with the most research, so galacto-oligosaccharides. And if you're someone who suffers with hormonal conditions, so if you suffer with PMS or endometriosis or fibroids, this can be an indication of high estrogen levels in the body. And our gut microbes can actually be involved in the estrogen imbalance. So basically they produce this compound called beta-glucuronidase, which basically allows estrogen to recirculate around the body. And actually the three prebiotics that have the most evidence for that would be GOS, glucomannan and inulin. So I'd recommend those if you suffer with estrogen-related conditions. And then as I mentioned again, if you tend to suffer with those kind of quite smelly farts, then FOS might be the one for you. And then you can also be thinking about your wider health concerns or goals. So again, this is all based on the big review of the research that we did at Invivo. But generally, the best evidence for reducing systemic inflammation would be inulin or FOS. For blood glucose management, we're looking at inulin, FOS, or resistant starch type 2. To support healthy blood lipids, so if you're looking to lower your cholesterol, and those oat beta-glucans and resistant starch type 2 as well. For normalising constipation or diarrhea is the PHGG that I mentioned, and for irritable bowel syndrome, the best research is in GOS. So you can personalise based on your wider health concerns and goals. And you may also need to think about your own tolerance when it comes to prebiotics. So as I mentioned earlier, especially certain types of prebiotics can cause GI side effects when they're first introduced. So common symptoms will be flatulence or bloating, some stomach rumbling, or some changes in stool consistency. But if they do occur, these side effects generally happen in the first couple of days of taking prebiotics. And what we do see is that we have this adaptation period where the gut microbiome changes. So we usually see that adaptation period lasting for about 1 to 2 weeks in the research. So, and then usually the symptoms subside and stay low unless you go in with you increase your dose very quickly. Those with IBS or FODMAP sensitivities, it might take a little bit longer for your gut to adapt, so just to be aware of that. But there are a few risk factors for side effects, so higher doses are more likely to elicit effects. So whether you're increasing prebiotics for your food or supplements, we'd always recommend going quite low and slow, gentle introduction. And then the type of prebiotic can have an effect, and I'll show you on the next slide which are more gentle prebiotics. Your baseline fibre intake can have an effect as well. So if you're someone who's already eating a lot of fibre in your diet, you're less likely to have side effects. So you maybe have to be less cautious. If you're someone who hasn't traditionally had much fibre in their diet, you probably definitely want to go in low and slow, maybe go in through dietary sources to begin with. Your baseline microbiome composition can have an effect, and also how quickly you increase the prebiotic dose to the full amount. So what I would say is that these side effects aren't necessarily a bad thing. They're usually they're not anything to worry about. They're quite normal, and they can be a sign that the prebiotic is working. It's being utilised by your microbiome. So it can be worth sometimes putting up with a little bit of discomfort for a couple of weeks for the benefits you'll see after that. Obviously, as long as it doesn't get too painful. If you are looking for a more gentle prebiotic for first introducing them, so PHGG, acacia gum and oat beta-glucans tend to be the most well tolerated, and then at the bottom is the FOS and the inulin. So if you're going in with those, much more slow and low introduction. And then the final consideration you might want to think about personalising your prebiotic intake with is convenience. So especially if you're someone who travels a lot for work or is away from the home a lot, or you have a very busy lifestyle, this can be quite important. So if we take resistant starch that you can get from green banana flour, for example, at the bottom there. So this is a really great way to get prebiotics in your diet, but on its own it's not very palatable. It makes this thick, sticky paste if you mix it with water. You really need to be using this, adding it to a smoothie or making green banana pancakes or baking with it, essentially. So that isn't very convenient if you're traveling or if you're very, very busy. And the same with oat beta-glucans. You generally have to consume them with food as well. They can easily be added to breakfast, but it's a little more complex than, say, for example, FOS or GOS or PHGG, where you can easily just put a teaspoon in a cup of tea. They dissolve, very little to no flavour, and they can easily be incorporated. So that's the final personalisation factor you might want to consider. And then finally, I just wanted to run through some quick, easy tips for introducing prebiotics. So even if you're not interested in personalising them, you just want to get some prebiotics in any which way, here's some easy ideas. So boosting your breakfast. So me personally, I get the majority of my prebiotics in at breakfast. So I eat between, last time I counted, I had between 9 and 11 types of plant in my breakfast bowl. So I do that by having oats, but I also add oat bran. I add loads of different nuts and seeds, flax, chia, pumpkin, sunflower seeds, and I put different types of fruit in there. And then I also add a prebiotic powder as well. So you can really, I'd say, boost your prebiotic intake at breakfast time. Soaking your oats overnight, so doing overnight oats, actually helps to increase the resistant starch content, so it gives you added benefits. And then prebiotic powders are very easy to add to smoothies as well, and into porridge. And as I mentioned, if you're going to be using bananas in your breakfast, going for those ever so slightly underripe green ones will have more beneficial effects. So cooking and cooling your high starch foods, so things such as potatoes, whole grain pasta, whole grain rice. This can help to increase the resistant starch content. So if you're having potatoes for dinner, make some extra and take them cold for your lunch the next day. And even if you do decide to reheat them, that doesn't affect the resistant starch content. It will still remain at that higher amount. Fermented vegetables, so things like sauerkraut and kimchi, I love these because they're a double whammy. You get both those live beneficial microbes that are in the food from the fermentation, and then you also get some fermentable prebiotic fibres as well. So I often encourage people to have a portion on their lunch or on their dinner as a side. And then prebiotic baking. So this is a nice one if you like to disguise your prebiotics. So a lot of the prebiotic fibres like PHGG and GARS and inulin, green banana flour, you can actually use them in baking. They can be really nice to add to things like banana bread or other kind of cakes. Because they're prebiotics, they're a fibre, we don't have to worry about the heat. They're not like probiotic foods where we wouldn't want to be heating them up. And this is a really nice way to get more prebiotics into children as well by adding prebiotics to baking. Adding more pulses and lentils to your diet is another key recommendation I would make. And an easy way to do this is just to add in pulses and lentils in place of meat in some dishes. So, for example, if you're using mince in bolognese, lasagna, cottage pie and shepherd's pie, could you replace some of those with some pulses? Or even if you just go half and half to begin with, that's still a step in the right direction. Tinned pulses, just as good. You know, if that's what's going to be easier for you to get in your diet, there's no problem with using tinned versions, and they can quickly be added to meals. And then spices as well. So obviously I didn't talk much about those non-fibre based prebiotics, but I did mention that some polyphenols are showing really good promising evidence as prebiotics, and spices are a really great source of a variety of polyphenols. So the more that you can use a variety of spices in your cooking, that's a great way to increase your prebiotic intake. And then if you're looking for some additional supplemental support, then you might want to add in a prebiotic powder. So these are the two main prebiotics we have at Invivo. So we've got the GOS, which was the one that had the nice evidence in IBS, and we've also got the PHGG, which is the other one that had a lot of those nice green arrows. PHGG is also one of the most well tolerated. It's low FODMAP, so that can be a really nice one to start on. It comes in a refillable tin and a compostable pouch as well. We just changed that to be more sustainable. And as I mentioned, always going low and slow introduction to reduce GI side effects, and increasing your dose gradually is a key recommendation. And it's also important to stay well hydrated when you're consuming more prebiotics. As with any type of fibre, that helps to keep bowel movements soft and easy to pass, and it reduces that risk of GI side effects. So just to sum up everything that I've talked about, my key prebiotic takeaways would be that prebiotics feed our beneficial gut microbes, but really importantly, they affect how our microbiome is functioning, and that's what impacts our health. Different prebiotics have different effects on the microbiome and GI symptoms, but research supports dietary and supplemental sources in different contexts, so there's no reason why you can't combine the two. And if you want to personalise your prebiotic to your individual needs or your individual microbiome, we can sometimes see enhanced benefits, and that's why testing your microbiome can sometimes be useful. And they can be simply incorporated into your daily diet, but always remember that low and slow introduction. Thanks everyone.